I'd like to next ask the Neighborhood Council Budget Advocates to come forward for their presentation. And similarly to the coalition presentation that we just heard, the Neighborhood Council Budget Advocates for many years have provided literally thousands of hours of independent analysis, research, a variety of different perspectives on our budget and outside-the-box thinking that comes when you have a system representing 95 different communities, each with different needs, different priorities. It has been a very helpful process, I think, for our budgeting over the years. It's certainly been helpful for the mayor and for this council to have that kind of outside-the-box thinking, kind of independent analysis, and also just to be able to open up the budget in a way that comes from having this sort of analysis and dialogue. So I really want to thank all of the budget advocates for the hundreds and hundreds of hours that you put in to this effort. And again, I'm very pleased to be able to continue this relatively new tradition of having the budget advocates present during budget and finance hearings, as well as we always do, in front of the full council as well. So, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, committee members. My name is Jay Handel. I'm the co-chair of the Budget Advocates again for this fiscal year. We also would like to thank the chair and the committee for having us again and having neighborhood councils once again have a seat at the table, something they hadn't had for years until the last few years. And it still is one of the few, if not the only seat at the table we continue to have. So thank you. At this time, I'd also like to thank the 36 committee members we have who have volunteered for the last 6 months to dig in, form 16 different committees, meet with the departments, the department heads, the unions, to try and dig in and find out what we can bring to the table as we'll call it added benefit to the discussion. I have with me today a number of budget advocates from around the city, and we do represent the entire city regions from the neighborhood council systems. And today what we'd like to do is go through the white paper briefly for certain items that people have come here for, to speak very briefly, to give you some pinpoint information, and then we would welcome any questions that you all would have for us. So I'd like to start, and we'll go in the numerical order of what we have here in our white paper. And we have salaries and pension reform. We have Ed Novi will be speaking to pension and item number 2. Ed.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Ed Novi. I'm from the Sunland-Tujunga Neighborhood Council and have given testimony in front of this committee for the last couple of years. My particular point of what I do the most research for this committee is related to pension reform. I hate the word pension reform. I wish we could use pension review, because it puts everybody on the same side, because we're trying to mitigate one of the worst problems we have, that it's a drag in our finances. I've used this particular point for a couple years now. It's the elephant in the room. The elephant's name is Stompy. And right on the picture you can see, or maybe you can't, it says pension liability. And Stompy here is giving a quote. Every dollar that we're not putting into the pension system is a dollar that we could put into city services. That's how real it is, that we need to pay attention to the pension liability problem that's facing our city. Right now, the pension liability is eating up roughly 25% of the general fund. This cannot be sustained in any way. We need to start looking at ways to move things forward. And I think one of the biggest points that the budget advocates have brought up to this committee and to the mayor in the past is that we need a pension review commission. We need city council and the mayor to step up and to appoint a commission that just looks at that particular issue. We've already seen from the LA 2020 Commission a couple good ideas. There's also some good ideas that the budget advocates have brought too. And we think that any use of a commission would help with those. We also would like to see that the city some way commit resources for a public education program on pension reform in particular. I think what we've seen the controller do on his website as far as opening up opening up the finances of the city is a perfect example of what we could do for pension costs too. Any stakeholder, any citizen, any union member should be able to go to a city website and kind of play with the various scenarios so that we all can become better educated as to where we're going with pensions and how it has such an adverse effect on our financial well-being here in the city. We also think that the controller's idea of combining the different pension boards is a brilliant way to cut costs. If we were to combine the LACERS board and the LAFPP board, we think this would add tremendous cost savings to the city. We also think that it needs, we've heard from the coalition today too, that it's about saving fees. And one of the major problems that you see in any pension fund is that you, in order to chase return, that you have to go for these higher paid fund managers. At the end of the day, you're really not getting much more than you would get off of the stock exchange if you were just tracking the index. So why not really think outside the box and just move everything to more of an index fund so that funds aren't wasted on high management fees and they're not being wasted on high cost of employees that would have to, your investment officers and such that are attached to the fund. I think the one big point that the budget advocates want to add as far as making a difference in pension reform is that we got to start looking at changing how the system works. We have to move away from the defined benefit program and go into a defined contribution plan. And with that, we have to, these are politically hard decisions, and maybe that's why the commission is so important, is to address these types of issues. We got to look at freezing the COLA. We have to, it's a means that can immediately wipe out a good portion of the unfunded liability. And it just makes the city healthier. It's something that we all have to think about and move forward. I'd like to pass on to the next speaker.
Good afternoon, Joanne Yavanek-Garb, West Hills Neighborhood Council. If you'll notice, out of the 8, 5 of us are from the Valley, so we're well represented in the Valley.
And 4 of us up here are too, by the way.
Yes. We have one foreigner. Yeah, I'm Jay. I'm going to talk about health care costs. City of Los Angeles employees currently contribute on average less than 5% of their salaries to pay for health care benefits. On average, private sector employees contribute 22% or more to health care benefits. Our CAO has called for all civilian non-sworn officers to contribute 10% of their salary toward health care benefits, starting with the new fiscal year. This new contribution would save the City of LA $22 million per year. We recommend and support the CAO's recommendation. This contribution must be incorporated into all new union contracts. In private industry plans have moved to higher deductibles, anywhere from $1,500 to $3,000 per year per individual in the plan. So an employee with dependents, they could pay up to $9,000 a year just in their deductible. This is before an in-network and only doctors who are assigned in their network. The copay is even in effect. Out of network, I know our health plan says we have a deductible of $9,000 before we go into a copay of 60-40%. And this is out of network. For a non-generic prescription, for a named prescription, it's $50 for a 1-month supply. So we're paying a lot more than 22% of our salary for health care benefits. Thank you.
Thank you. And just one little point of clarification on that, for the sake of people listening at home, that what some of our bargaining agreement, excuse me, some of our bargaining units have already agreed to, and what the CAO has proposed is not a 10% of salary contribution. It's a 10%. It's a contribution of 10% of the cost of the health care. So the city would bear 90% of the cost, the employee 10% of the cost. It doesn't mean that a highly paid employee has to pay 10% of their salary. Maybe a small
But we're paying
semantic
22%
difference,
of our salary.
20% of the premium.
But with,
Thank you.
okay. No.
Next item.
Harvey.
My name is Harvey Goldberg. I'm a budget advocate and a member of the Tarzana Neighborhood Council. I wanted to talk about technology, and I think we all know that the city's systems are somewhat lacking. I don't think any of us have any idea as to what the cost is related to our old clunking along systems and how much more efficient we could be. We recommend strongly that we go to Enterprise Resource Planning Systems, ERP, systems such as Oracle, SAP, etc. These systems are very extensive, tie together the various departments that use these systems. Today, each department has their own system. They don't talk. They can't communicate with one another. You cannot get the information that you need if you're in another department. In order to do this, it's going to take a long time. We know that we have to patch what we have today, but we really have to consider that we're in the 21st century. A lot of the systems that we have today were developed many, many, many years ago, and they don't get us anywheres. If we want to be efficient, if we want to be able to do more with the staff that we have today, we have to make them more efficient. In order to do this, it's going to take a lot of money. You're probably talking about $1 billion to $2 billion. We do not have this money in our budget. I think we all recognize this. But the only way we're going to be able to do this is to borrow the money, bond the money that we need to develop the systems and the hardware, the software and the hardware, to put this together, to make this city very, very efficient. And I'll just relate a story that I heard, and in New York City, there was a major snowstorm, I don't know, 2-3 years ago, and it was early in the season, and everyone was complaining. The sanitation drivers who were driving the snowplows, because they put the snowplows in front of the sanitation trucks, said they found them in Dunkin' Donuts. They were hanging around, not working. For the next snowstorm, Mayor Bloomberg had a GPS on every sanitation truck. So, you know, let's think forward, let's move forward, but consider the importance of bonding this money, because you're never going to find it out of your current budgets. Thank you.
Of course, I wonder if that resulted in a lot of snowplow drivers eating donuts while they drive, which is probably not a good thing
but
either.
They were moving the snow.
Hello? Okay. My name's Jack Humphreyville. I'm with the Greater Wilshire Neighborhood Council. Mike, I'd like to thank you for bringing up asking the CEO to report back on the Living Within Its Means Charter Amendment. So thank you very much. I'm looking forward to Miguel's report. We have a busted system where the City Council has demonstrated that it is incapable of balancing the budget, maintaining our streets and sidewalks and the rest of our failing infrastructure, and fund our pension plans. Over the last decade, increases in salaries, pensions, and benefits have increased by more than $500 million more than the increase in revenues. This has resulted in the worst roads in the country, cracked sidewalks, and a significant reduction in services. This year, despite record revenues, the city is raiding the reserve fund for $129 million. As a result, voters do not trust the city, as witnessed last March when 55% of the voters rejected Proposition A. A Live Within Its Means charter amendment has three parts to it. The first is the city needs to develop and adhere to a 5-year financial plan. The second part is that the city needs to pass 2-year balanced budgets based on a funny little concept called general accepted accounting principles. And thirdly, over the next 20 years, the city needs to fix our streets, our sidewalks, and the rest of our failing infrastructure, and fully fund our pension plans. Without reform, the odds of the $4.5 billion street tax, which is, by the way, equal to 7.5% increase in our real estate taxes, receiving the for that to receive the 2/3 of the vote, I think is very, very slim. So without meaningful reform, I think we can say goodbye to the odds of the street tax. They're all interrelated. They all relate to one another, and that's the way the voters of Los Angeles see it. Thank you.
According to my poll.
My name's Linda Lee, and I am here representing Central Hollywood Neighborhood Council. And I'm going to start with the fact that it's a common perception that entertainment, tourism, and technology are probably the primary industries we have left here in Los Angeles. There are other cities that are offering incentives to encourage and increase new business and to create new jobs. New York, for example, offers 10 years of local tax-free existence to new companies in specified areas. Texas is running ads here in Southern California, boasting of the fact that they're so very business-friendly. Other states, Georgia, Florida, are also offering things that are simply not being, they're offering real incentives, especially to the entertainment industry. The Neighborhood Council budget advocates strongly support the solution offered by the LA 2020 Commission, which does encourage or suggest a cooperative effort with all of Southern California cities and counties to address the issue of increasing new business and creating new jobs. Thank you.
So I would like to touch on 3 subjects at this point: volunteerism, the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment, and the LAPD and civilianization and issues in LAPD. Volunteerism. This city council should declare this the year of volunteers in LA. This city, the stakeholders in the city have given more time and more hours to this city than I think ever before. Recognizing them and encouraging more only helps build this city. We are one city family. We are not the coalition. We are not the police union. We are not the IBEW as a city family. The city family is everybody who lives, works, owns property, shops, and breathes in our city. And we need to recognize that. And I think by recognizing the volunteers and bringing those volunteers to the table and giving them more opportunities within our departments, as opposed to in some cases where we actually hold them back from volunteering and being a part of our city and a part of our departments, what makes all the sense in the world. And we can grow our city in conjunction with our union partners as opposed to having confrontation and having turmoil out within our city because we're not embracing our volunteers as we should be. As much as we embrace our union partners, they need to embrace the volunteers and recognize that we have to work together to make this a better city. And I urge that. As far as the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment, you've seen the requests in the budget by the department. This is a department that in 2006 had $6 million budget, 65 people working for it, and 87 neighborhood councils. Today you've got over 95 neighborhood councils, a few more on the boards coming through, about 22 employees. They're decimated. And we cannot service our customers, the people of this city. That's what neighborhood councils were put here for. And we just can't do the job without the tools. A 20% cutback this year is more draconian than it's been, because we're at the point where, under the charter, I don't think the department can actually manage what it needs to manage. And I would implore this committee to look very hard at that $500,000 that they're asking for as bare bones add-ons, which is a lot less, I think. If you gave them the $500,000, they'd still be $300,000 less than what the original request was in their budget. And I would urge you to take a good hard look at that. And again, don't sweep our money. Put it back into the department and let that money take care of the $500,000 they need. It just seems to make sense. Because outside of Nazario, I think you have a department manager in Dunn who does an incredible job with nothing. Absolutely nothing. So, as I said to you in a budget meeting when street services came, I say it again about Dunn. Let's give the general managers who are taking the loaves and fishes and making them multiply, let's give them more to multiply with so we can have a better city. Civilianization of LAPD, fire department, civilianization in general. You know, managed hiring has put us in a position where we've cut back on staff in so many departments. And if you look at the LAPD, you know, I know you've asked for a report back on how many civilians positions are being manned by LAPD officers who have been trained for an awful lot of money and get paid well to do civilian jobs. And it just doesn't seem to make sense that we're doing that. And it's the same thing with the jailers. And I would certainly love to hear the report back on the jailer situation as well. But we also have a concern that the Budget and Finance needs to look at and the City Council needs to look at. Since 2007, this city has paid out more than $49 million in LAPD officers against LA City, discrimination of sex, gender, racial bias, and retaliation. That's almost $8 million a year that's been paid out. Why does this continue to happen? Why is the system not being looked at? This committee should be asking for a report back. Number one, can the police department work with an arbitration as opposed to going to court? We, the budget advocates, know of specific instances where an officer was paid over $1.5 million when all he asked for was his attorney fees and his job back. And he was given $1.5 million and thrown off the force. That cost this city more than $1 million than it had to. And we lost a good officer. So the request of your committee is, look at this systematic problem. There's a systemic issue here of $49 million being paid out. That's $49 million in bias. It's unacceptable in our city. It's unacceptable in the NBA. It's unacceptable in our city. And this is something we would ask that you take a good, hard look at. And again, as far as the civilianization goes, I think there's a lot of money to be saved and a lot of efficiency to be put together by bringing civilians back into the workforce. Joanne? Dr. Dan, I'm sorry.
Thank you. We're beginning to get toward the end of our presentation here, but I hope you're as impressed as all of us. At the amount of input you've been provided with, and Mr. Krikorian, it is to your credit that this is being done. Your predecessor gave us the first seat at this table, and we are very appreciative of that. We have a situation now that we've given you all kinds of suggestions about our collections, about our city efficiencies, how to help things go better. All of these in the best of intentions. It's my privilege to talk about some things that are actually medical, and as you know, I am a physician. We have a great deal of medical services, and although we call our fire department a fire department, it's an emergency medical service fire department. 80% of their telephone calls for help come from medical reasons. And we now have the emergency medical service, which is about 20 years old, and I've had an intimate experience with it all that time. But interesting enough, from a financial point of view, the only medical services that we get paid for are ambulance transports. And we get paid about 1/3 of the cost of them. And medical services are the responsibility of the state and federal government, not the city. So we are supplementing or subsidizing the state in this activity. Now, collections are so important that one of the other recommendations of the Neighborhood Council Budget Advocates has been for several years a central collection agency to take the task away from the departments, free them back to their primary missions and visions, and let a competent separate agency efficiently, promptly, and fairly collect monies that we just don't get, hundreds of millions of dollars. But in the area of medicine and in the area of our emergency medical services, I think you've seen some of these data before. We're going to show them to you again, where there are something between $50 and $100 million of direct medical care that we're providing. Sometimes it's just the paramed or the emergency medical technician on the scene reassuring the person that everything's going to be all right, that this isn't a serious problem. But it goes from that level of important medical service all the way up to life-saving, acute, and advanced cardiac life support, saving lives right in the field. You can't buy that. The cost of it is unmeasurable, but we don't bill for it at all. Some people have told me that we don't do that because the state won't let us, or there's other reasons, but there's no valid reason. I've put some data together that indicate about a $61 million increase in income that could be available for just very basic and very conservative billing of our medical services. I hope that not only that, but other recommendations that have been put before you by this group and by the other groups and by the labor groups can really be shown that it is received, it is noted, and it is taken into your consideration. One of the biggest things that needs to be done about all of our major actions here is when we take an action, we should already build into the action a feedback loop where we review what it is we've done, go back, take another look, decide if we need to change it, increase it, decrease it, and move forward in that way. I hope to see that that's the attitude as we go into performance-based budgeting, but I can only echo Harvey Goldberg's ideas. This is going to take a tremendous change in the way in which we collect, handle, and really act on the data that we have. It's a huge task, and I don't envy you that task. I'm glad it's yours.
It's ours.
I've noticed that, yes.
So we actually have some happy news we do bring you guys once in a while. And I think another bright spot in LA and how it manages things is sustainability. We're the world leader in sustainability. And when you look at the built environment, that's especially where we're the best. In the nation, we have more Energy Star rated buildings than any other city in the country. The next city below us is Washington, D.C., and that's several hundreds of buildings below us. Chicago is below us. New York is below us. L.A. leads as far as Energy Star ratings, and into that you can see visibly how much we've reduced our energy, how much the cost to our environment and to the bottom line, it makes a difference as far as Energy Star. We're also a leader as far as LEED buildings go, which is a certification system where buildings combine not just energy efficiencies, but they also look at transportation needs, having bike racks as part of their built environment, being near transportation hubs, whether it's mass transit or other means. We lead that like no other city in the country. In fact, a couple weeks ago, the U.S. Green Building Council announced that instead of going to San Diego for their convention in 2016, they're going to come here to Los Angeles. That's a big, big deal. Over 30,000 professionals in that field are going to be here in this city. We need to take more advantage of this particular leadership. And I think one thing that we're not doing that other cities are doing, and they're starting to get that higher and higher up to that, they're chasing us. They want to be the #1 city with the most amount of LEED buildings or the greater amount of Energy Star buildings. They're collecting data. They have put forth ordinances that make building owners report to the city exactly what they're using for water and for energy. This is where we need to start taking the lead too. We need to start moving forward. We need to have all of our buildings in Los Angeles registered. This is also a way to make some money for the city too. But the main goal is to start tracking our energy use, our water use, so that we can become even better innovators and keep those jobs here in Los Angeles. Thank you.
And Ed, if I could just interject on that point to thank you for raising it. And it's not just the environmental benefits, of course, that comes from our commitment to sustainability, because when it comes to energy efficiency and water efficiency in particular, this is billions of dollars of capital investment in generation infrastructure, for example, that can be deferred if we reduce our demand. And the economic impacts, both the stimulative impacts you're talking about in creating jobs, but also the actual cost savings that we realize from our sustainability just can't be overestimated. So thank you for raising it.
As budget advocates, what we would like to see the city of Los Angeles become is a city of green tape, not red tape. Over the past, since the fiscal year 2010-2011, we have, and including this year, we have given you approximately 85 recommendations to look at and to act on, things that we thought were important. We have identified areas of structural, physical, and technological disconnects. As Mayor Garcetti stated in his inaugural address, these times demand a back-to-basics approach focused above all else on our economy and jobs. With an improved economy, we can move from reactionary to thoughtful decision-making. This year's budget provides the mayor, city council, and all Angelenos with the opportunity to begin to piece together solutions that can set the city on a new course to restore our place as a beacon to the world. Thank you so much for your consideration.
Thank you all very much. Thank you for your detailed report and all of your, again, as I said at the outset, your literally hundreds and hundreds of volunteer hours that you've devoted to this. And Mr. Handel, I agree with you about this being the year of volunteerism. Probably every year should be called the year of volunteerism. But as you well know, this year, more than most, we've seen a dramatic increase in engagement in our neighborhood council movement. The elections have seen a dramatic increase in engagement and turnout. To me, that's an indication that the people of Los Angeles and the taxpayers of Los Angeles really haven't abandoned this city, as some in the blogosphere like to suggest. They haven't turned their back on this city. Quite to the contrary, the people and the taxpayers of this city and all of the stakeholders of this city find this to be a place where, with change, there can be continuing great progress in the future. And so I think that's reflected in most of your comments, and I appreciate it very much. Since we don't want to appear to be biased towards the Valley too much here, we're going to start our questions with Mr. Bonin.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I should note, as I said, the mic didn't catch it. I may be in a minority here, but the Budget Advocates is chaired or co-chaired?
Co-chaired.
Co-chaired by a CD11 resident, Jay Handel, who may have had the opportunity during this hearing this week to have asked more questions than I have, actually, because he's been here in public comment at every opportunity. Thank you, Jay, and thank you the rest of you for your attention and your diligence. I've appreciated the recommendations you've made, not just this year, but over the years. The person, obviously, I hear from most is Jay, because I've run into him a lot, and he's basically stalks me at my office or in West LA at different points. So I've heard his ideas and his area of focus most frequently. I wanted to ask a couple questions of a few of you. Jack, you mentioned that I asked for the report back on some of your recommendations. I anticipate that in Miguel's report back, he's going to say, we do use generally accepted accounting principles. Why by what basis do you determine that the city doesn't?
I determined that by a response that Miguel made a couple of years ago to the neighborhood councils on this very issue. Primarily, in the budgeting side, they use cash accounting as opposed to generally accepted accounting principles. That was, I can dig it up for you. I think it was a couple of years ago. It was item 148 of Miguel's report back to you guys. So, but they just, it's generally accepted accounting principles. I think it also gets into what's not included in the budget. Yes, we balanced the budget, but we failed to, fix our streets. It's some of the stuff that's neglected. That's why we, in the measure, I want to make sure that we have some idea that we're going to maintain our infrastructure and fund our pension plans. So it's item 148.
148. Okay, thank you. One of the things, you guys had three main recommendations, and the third was to get caught up on our streets and our core maintenance over what period of time?
20 years.
20 years. How do you assume that we get to that?
Well, when I first started talking about a live within its means, it was 10 years. Then I did some numbers, and it became 15 years. And when I saw the report by Mitch's people on the street tax, that was a 20-year plan. So therefore, we're at 20 years. I have not done detailed projections as to what what you need to do and all the money that needs to be spent over 20 years. Just haven't done it. That's more in the city's ballpark. But 20 years is twice what 10 years used to be, and 10 years is what we were told before. So there's no scientific, but that's a whole generation.
Okay. Pension reform. One of the recommendations was for another pension, or for a pension reform commission, or a pension review commission. I'll use your terminology. It's something that the 2020 Commission has called for in some form. Many of us thought that that's what the 2020 Commission actually was and what its purpose was going to be. Not surprising when you have a panel of folks like 2020 had that have leaders of organized labor and leaders of conservative business interests, that it was very hard to come to a consensus recommendation on what a pension reform package would look like. How do you imagine that we put together a commission that doesn't face the same problem? If I just had a commission of two and I put you and Cheryl Parisi in a room together, what's the common ground we're trying to get to?
Then you can pitch a tent and sell tickets.
I think one key element that was missing from the 2020 Commission was actual citizen stakeholder participation in that commission. It was a kind of a who's list of who in the city government. It didn't include stakeholders. It didn't include neighborhood council members. It didn't include regular people. I think when you get regular people on this commission, along with union leaders, with business leaders, you're more apt to move in a forward direction. It was already stacked, I think, against the 2020 commission when you had labor, Brian Darcy, or the head of the police fire union, or those individuals have an opinion that they have to stick by for their stakeholders. The business community the same. But I think when you come down to us as stakeholders, we actually keep a better mind on our wallets. And I think that's part of the discussion you have to have with pension review.
Do you anticipate, I mean, there's a lot of different proposals, but, you know, in one camp there's a bunch of folks who agree with you, who feel that we should move away from a defined benefit, and then there's a group of people who think that the defined benefit is very, very important. I mean, do you see that there's a way to get those two camps to agree on something?
Absolutely. I think that every solution for pension reform is already out there. It's just up on the shelf. We just have to figure what works best for Los Angeles. And it may come down to that a hybrid program is the best way to move forward. But there has to be the discussion, because we keep on coming back to this point where we don't really talk about the unfunded liability the way we should, how to address that. How are we going to deal with, as an example, last year everybody was excited because the stock market did so well, so therefore Lacers is able to report to all of us, hey, things are great because the returns were awesome. Well, when you look at how the first quarter went, that's not so awesome. And you look at, even in the past month, how the stock market has been. At the end of the year, count on it, these funds are going to require more money from the city, which means taxpayers, in order for things to balance out. So again, I think everybody has a vested interest, and we should be able to move forward on this.
Yeah. One thing on the pensions is the LA 2020 Commission did not have the experts there. There was differing opinion. They couldn't come up with the unanimous position, so they said we want the commission. But analyzing the pensions is very complex work. All you have to do is look at one of those actuarial reports, and it's enough to put you to sleep, pretty quickly. But they're very thick and they're very dense. But they didn't have the capabilities of really developing the underlying information that's necessary in order to come up with a whole bunch of solutions.
I'm just wondering if we really need a whole bureaucracy and staff to do that, or if we can't just lock you and Molly Rhodes in the back for a couple hours and see if you guys come up.
They said, I think Austin's group was 120 days. Go to work, come back, 120 days. We could probably go out and even probably find people that would do this for free if you want.
You guys have a lot of recommendations for ways to trim costs, improve efficiency, some of them very good. The main idea I saw to bring more revenue in from the other end of the ledger was to increase collections. Are there any other revenue generating sources or revenue enhancements that you see or advocate?
Sure. Certainly increasing collections is something we've been talking about since 2011, knowing the inefficiencies of the collection system and what we write off annually in bad debt because of the system of collections we have. But when you look at items like Dr. Dan brought up about charging on medical costs that other cities around the country already do that we just don't do, that's a gap that we have the ability to fill and bring more revenue without having to change state laws or any other laws. It's a matter of looking at how we bill and what we bill and bringing those revenues in. Looking at issues like code enforcement. Okay, how do we get more code enforcement? You and I have had the conversation about having a fee on every new building, whether it's per square foot on the building or on the platform or whatever it happens to be, to have a sustainable code enforcement group moving forward. I think if we start looking, really outside that box to find all the services that we give as a city and all of those services that are not revenue neutral at this point, and trying to identify how do we make them revenue neutral. What services can we make them revenue neutral? There's a lot of services we cannot and will never be able to, and that's why we have all the other fees and taxes to sustain our city. But the reality is, I'm sure this city has dozens of issues that we could look at and figure out, ask the general managers to come back and say, this group of people who work in this, how do we make this revenue neutral? Does that mean more fees? Does that make us more business unfriendly? We keep hearing business friendly and business unfriendly and more fees. But we also keep hearing that we have a school system that's lagging. We have a city infrastructure that takes forever to get anything done. I can't build a building. It takes me 2 years to get permits. I have inspectors who come out. The first guy tells me the blue book, it shouldn't be blue, it should be black. I make it a black book, and the next guy comes out and tells me it should be a blue book, and I have to redo what I'm doing again. So there's inefficiencies within what we do that cost us, that make us business unfriendly as well. So maybe putting in the right revenue neutral areas will make our city a more business friendly city in the long run, where people will want to come and spend their dollars to build their buildings, house their businesses, bring their employees, educate their children, spend their money, and make this the best city in the United States.
Okay, that leads me to sort of my final question. You talked about, you talked in that answer right there about bringing more businesses here to Los Angeles, and you talked in some of your presentation about attracting the entertainment industry. A lot of times when we're competing for a particular employer or a particular industry, we're competing against another city or another state, and we need to offer incentives. But half the time we do that, and sometimes there's merit to the criticism, I think, and sometimes there's not, it's, oh, those horrible elected officials did another taxpayer giveaway, another boondoggle. So which is which? I mean, you're saying let's be giving more incentives, but then on the other hand, I'm assuming once we do, we're going to see a blog post saying these guys are giving away the store and this is money we should have been saving. And Jack's writing it already.
So here's a perfect example of a very small city doing something and the way they did it. When I was in Culver City, and I was being forced to move my location, I was going to move out of the city. The city council voted to give me $100,000, of which, over the next 5 years, my sales taxes had to cover that $100,000. If it did, then the loan was forgiven. If it didn't, I had to pay the difference. So we keep hearing about $43 million to this project and, this developer. We keep hearing money to this one and to that one. I think the problem is not so much that we give the incentives. The question is, someone has to come back and show the public that we got our money's worth of what we gave. If we gave away the TOTs, show me when they built that hotel, show me the occupancy rate, show me the numbers, show me that we're getting our money back, both in TOT and the good things that happen around when you bring those businesses in. Because those are the things that I think are missing from the transparency when the people say you gave this one $43 million. Well, what if the mall closed? What would be the loss of revenue if that mall closed? What's the increase in revenue now that they've redone it? How much more business is that mall doing? And how is the city benefiting from the revenue that's coming in?
You want to talk about increasing revenues. Let's take the village at Topanga. That was a $60 million giveaway, if you will, for a project that's going to have a rate of return of probably north of 20%. Cash on cash. It's going to be an absolute massive home run. They didn't need our $2 million a year. If we do a loan like that, we should not. It should be one as a loan, and secondly, we ought to take an equity kicker there, where if this thing is $350 million and ends up being worth $700 million, we get 10% of the ups. We're going to get performance fees. Isn't that nice? So we go out there and capture $35 million for the city. I mean, we are basically being an equity participant there. An equity participant, and we ought to get equity rates of return.
The primary purpose in the charter for the neighborhood councils is to be an advisor to the city. It's also, and this is a direct outcrop of the chartered requirement, that we report to the city on the delivery of services to us. I spoke a moment ago, and I think several of us have been speaking now about creating a feedback loop, an observer, someone who is going to talk about what is the result of these actions that you take. You've opened the door to us. You've given us a seat at the table. Now you've given labor a seat at the table. Let's put this table in front of us more frequently. Let's do this more often. Let's do this during the year. Let's do this about major concerns. The biggest concern is obviously the deferred maintenance we've been experiencing for so long. And it's just not feasible for us to get things done on the basis of the amounts of money we have and where that money is. Let's talk more. Let's have a great deal of interaction so that you get what we offer, and what we offer is the voice of the public. At least that's what we're trying to offer. Yes, we have personal opinions. Yes, you do too. But we're all in this together until we really start working together and show productivity. This is just so much wind.
Okay, I think I got to turn it back.
Can I just answer one question that you raised, which was, you know, when we give away something, do you want us to do it or not do it? Do you want us to bring in business or not bring in business? Well, one of the things you have to look at is when you're making a deal with someone, you cannot give them away the first dollar. You should be their partner. If you have a new business that's coming into the city that's going to require city services, you have to make sure that you're getting some money to provide the services that you have to give them. So instead of giving someone $50-odd million and saying you get the first $50 million in taxes, etc., as a credit, maybe we're partners. Maybe we get the first, we split it. So we get 50 cents and you get 50 cents. You'll get your return back, you'll get your $50 million, but it'll take you longer. But in the meantime, the city is generating revenue to be able to provide the services that we have to. Otherwise, we're losing money every time we give this money away, first dollar away.
That's on a project basis, not a policy basis.
On a project basis.
I will now defer to the Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Bonin. Well, let's go to Mr. Blumenfield.
Okay. Very much appreciate all of your input on this, and I liked, you know, talking about this is the year of the volunteer. All of you spent a lot of time, and it shows when you look through these documents, time and energy in making this happen. So I want to just join the chorus in applauding you for that, and really appreciate there's a lot of good ideas here. You know, when you're talking about changing the red tape to green tape, when you're talking about trying to focus on the return, and Harvey especially, I mean, not only because you're my constituent and in Tarzana, but when you're talking about the virtual infrastructure, which is something I've focused on a lot, it really resonated with me. In fact, one of the things I plan on asking when we're having the MICLA discussion is about getting reports back on how we can treat our virtual infrastructure more like our physical infrastructure, because both are equally important if we're going to grow this city. And I'm going to ask for a number of report backs that are completely in line with what you're talking about, because if we are going to have the open data that we've talked about in the rest of the folks around this horseshoe, a lot of the things that you're talking about is things that require feedback loops, that require the information, that require the data. And we're just sort of scratching the surface on that with the controller's open data, with the mayor's open data. But I'm a big believer in Justice Brenner's sunshine is a great disinfectant. And you know, you get that sunlight in it, you see where the data is, you let everybody manipulate that data, they come up with new ways to find solutions. And it's not just having the so-called experts or the folks who are in that area, but everyday people looking at that data and coming up with solutions. And so I applaud that. I agree that this shouldn't just be a once-a-year conversation. Certainly with me, it's not. I know I work with my neighborhood councils, and I know all my colleagues do as well, on a very regular basis. Staff member at every meeting, and attend many meetings myself to try to keep that feedback loop there, because that's a big part of what makes our neighborhood council system special. So I look forward to working with you on that. I was also interested in this issue on the alignment of our medical costs that you're talking about. How we can, maybe we can get some report backs on how we can draw down more, Medi-Cal, Medicaid funding for these types of services, because
You're obviously not a doctor, you see. If you had been, you would know how difficult it is to work with those people. You think we're having trouble working with you? That's easy.
Well, you mentioned getting more state and federal money, and that's where my mind went to. Where does that state and federal money come from?
All of this money is from state and federal sources, and you don't get it unless you not only bill for it, but you very actively continue to press to receive it. What's happened is we've gotten a little more money from the ambulance services by an adjustment in the fee schedule. Well, the fee schedule is very difficult to work with, and as far as billing for medical services, we're not going to get it until we start doing it, and we're going to have to get some legal bases for it, and we're going to have to develop some legal structure to be able to do it. Like everything else, these are not simple projects, but even a very conservative and I think a very broad brush estimate that I've made is over $60 million a year. That's worth an investment in time and effort. Okay. So I hope we carry it further, and I hope we work on doing something. We offered this kind of information, myself and other medical colleagues, to former decision makers. They were too busy, and I think that's probably part of our problem. I have a concept, maybe it's wrong, but I have a concept that you're busy people. All of you city council members and you mayors and city controllers, and I saw the city attorney here. You're busy people. You've got a lot of things on your mind. You've got a lot of responsibilities, and you've got limited resources. We all do, but you've got an awful lot more resource here that's asking to help you. And I'm asking you to call on us, and we can go forward with a lot of these ideas.
Well,
Also,
sorry, go ahead.
excuse me, also, we don't have to reinvent the wheel on this. There are cities that are doing this, San Francisco, Oakland, Austin, Texas. These are major cities that are already doing this, so they already have the systems in place. In addition to that, this could be a model for all of the LA County, incorporating the 88 cities in there with their emergency services, so that everybody could contribute and everybody would be using the same model for LA County as well.
Thanks. And just generally, I mean, we need to leverage, as you've said, we need to leverage not just the resources in terms of dollars that we have, but leverage the brain power that we have, and that includes all the volunteers and neighborhood council folks and budget advocates that are here today. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Blumenfield. Members, it's 1:15, and for the sake of, or just so that everybody can plan their afternoon, the staff who's here to talk about the various accounts that we have coming up, when we conclude our discussion with the budget advocates, we're going to take a brief lunch break before we go into discussion of those accounts. So if you're waiting for one of those, you have a little bit of time if you want to go out and get your lunch or something. Now we're going to go to Mr. Englander and Mr. Kretz, then we're going to wrap this up probably within 20 minutes or so. We'll take about 45 minutes for lunch, and then we'll be back. So, Mr. Englander.
Great, thank you very much. And I think most of what I was going to say was, so I'm sitting here with all my notes, checking them off, were said. But a couple of things that I do want to point out is that you are early adopters and supporters of performance-based metrics, and I really appreciate that. And particularly since I went to many of you, I'm not sure if collectively, but individually for sure, and talk to you about the ideas that I had in bringing that here, and where we can actually start really affecting some major change. And we all agree, and we all knew at the time, that it was going to take time, and it's not something that you can turn on a dime. And it's not, I mean, it's a major cultural change. It's a sea change, and just developing what those are. It's the first year we've had that. We're starting to discuss what metrics should be used and what categories by department. Then you create those baselines and transparencies of measurement and what should be measured and how do you value that and then how do you fix it and then how do you fund for it. I mean, there's a lot of different steps. And so I talked to many of you individually over the years, and it was one of the cornerstones of my campaign, as you know, bringing that in here, and I applaud the mayor and all the others that have been pushing for that as well. So I wanted to thank you for that, because it's something that you guys have been talking about early on as well. And I think one of the things that wasn't mentioned in your report, you talked a little bit about some of the civilization in our first responders and police and fire, but some of the things that we're also doing in FireStat, which is revolutionary. And I would encourage you to embrace the fire department as it's been decimated, and we start restoring it based on metrics, performances, and all the other things, closely working with UFLAC, and I know you guys are big supporters of our first responders, so I wanted to make sure I brought that up. There may be some place in your solutions and suggestions for your white paper throughout the year, an update, and perhaps even in next year's thinking, is looking at some of the department metrics and what you propose in some of those key areas as well. As this evolves and develops, you seem to touch on every single category, or virtually every category, maybe some of the metrics as well, and offering up some suggestions and saying, okay, here in this department, here's something we could look at, and here's something the neighborhood councils have looked at. And so that might be something, because you talked about the loop back and coming back and measuring what's done. Well, that's built into this process. So developing the metrics then in each one of those, it's not automatic. So taking advantage of that, I think, would just be a suggestion that I think would help us as well. I wanted to thank you also early on, although we'll agree to disagree on what you've got on SOSLA, and I won't go through all that in detail, because we did do a scientific study, and it's about 1,000 pages. But with that, I did go to you all early on. We did. Day one, in fact, early on. And the one thing you pushed back on was don't do a general obligation bond. Make sure that you go out there and talk to everybody, which we've really done a lot of, and tirelessly, and we'll continue to do. And that was based on your suggestions. And with that, a number of things that were based on your suggestions were make sure it's not on the backs, and we haven't done anything yet, but make sure it's on, just developed a plan for discussion purposes, but make sure it's not on the backs of just the property owners, business and residents. And one of the things coming back with, without talking about the detail on it, is that is a plan where 60% of the total bill of $4.5 billion would be the burden on the people outside of the city, not inside the city. We've got all the facts and the statistics, the financial reports, the outside consultants' reports, everything to back all that up. But without going into all that, that was an exercise that we took on hardcore and full time, because it was based on your suggestions. Slow this thing down, go knock on doors, and we did that. And so I just wanted to echo a lot of the chorus that was said and say thank you, and definitely a continued year of volunteerism.
Thank you, Mr. Englander. And just want to reinforce your point about metrics. It's an excellent suggestion, because the whole point of performance-based budgeting is to figure out how best to serve the consumer, the customer. And our citizens, represented by the neighborhood councils, are the customer. So who better to help develop the metrics that indicate whether a department is being successful in servicing the customer? I think that's an absolutely great suggestion for the budget advocates to take up. Yeah. Mr. Kretz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd also express my appreciation for all the work that you've done this year, and since you began this effort, it's definitely a big help to us, and as we look for ways to make the city more efficient and make our budget process work better. Couple things that I strongly agree with, and I've been talking about for a long time, sharing pension investors, because I think all of our systems do well, but there's no reason why we need to have 3 sets of investments that essentially get us to the same place. We raised that this year in the budget process. We're told, oh, there's different requirements. I don't buy it for a second. I think a good investment is a good investment, and I think it could save us a lot of money. And I also strongly support the idea of a look at bringing this in-house. I think there's a lot of consensus behind this concept, and I believe with all the different massive fees that we pay for our investments, that if we did it in-house, there has to be a way to save some significant money, even if we were paying the same people. One of the ideas I hadn't heard before, which I think is great and one that I've spoken about in a tangential way every budget year, we've had a lot of efficiencies that we've suggested each year that we then haven't implemented because they are IT related. And so from the very first year that I was here, which happened to be when the budget crisis really hit, not because of me arriving, but just was there, we would come up with all these suggestions which clearly could save money, and then we cut the IT budget. And so we make it impossible to do. So the idea of trying to identify combined all of our bonding IT needs and just doing it as a bond, we would, I believe, and I don't think anyone's ever done this larger scope of analysis, I believe we would save a lot of money, that we would see that amortized very quickly. And not only would it save us money, we wouldn't be in a ridiculous situation where we have computer systems that are 30 years old and one person in the city knows how to operate them. And they retire, and then we're trying to find consultants or we're trying to hire them back because nobody knows how to use outdated systems. And there's a lot of danger in all of that. So I think that is a brilliant idea. I'd like a report back on it. I don't know how difficult it would be, but it seems to be one of the better ideas we've had. I also echo my colleagues in terms of looking for more opportunities for volunteers, but I wonder again if we could get a report back, and not too quickly, take our time on this, but a report back looking for true systematic uses for volunteers. And I used to be a little bit more hesitant about this, particularly because you don't want to replace the work of our city workers, but to be honest, there's so much more need than I think we could ever come close to providing, that I'm not worried that we'll run out of work for our city workers. We already have so much more than we can do, and more than we could do even if we restored our workforce to pretty close to where it was. So if we could look at that in a more systematic way, I think that would be great. We've had a lot of conversations about civilianization and civilian jailers. We've heard different things about whether we'd save much money or not now, but the fact is we're hiring a lot of LAPD folks at a 20% less salary than their colleagues. I'm not sure how long that's going to last. At some point, we're probably going to have to start restoring some of that because everyone else is paying more. And so if we're making that assumption, it shouldn't necessarily be on keeping those salaries as artificially low indefinitely. I think if we hire civilian jailers, we will save ourselves more money than the current calculations that we're using. I think LAPD risk management has been a disastrous area. And part of it is not that discrimination exists. We've heard cases where we've had to approve settlements, but we are sure there was no discrimination actually happening. But based on what a jury has initially done, we can see the handwriting on the wall. So I think we do need to put a lot more focus into that, more arbitration. To some degree, I think the bias issues are real, and we need to address those as well. And I don't know if this is an area that we need to provide more motivation to for the LAPD, because there are not too many things that they do badly. This is one of them. And if these costs came more out of their general budget, there might be more motivation to get a stronger handle on this. So, perhaps if they had a number like $5 million and beyond that it just came out of their budget and they had to fill it in, maybe not the worst idea. Also, I don't know if there's been that much focus on trying to get other entities to reimburse us for medical. So I'd like a report back and more serious study on that. It sounds like there may be more money to be gotten, and I think we shouldn't leave that on the table. I think the idea of a central collection agency, a few of us have been talking about this and pushing for it for a long time. I think it's absolutely critical, and our collections will never really hum to the efficiency that they should until that happens. One other suggestion I was thinking about in the conversation that we were having about energy in city buildings is similar to what we were saying about IT. We know we save money when we retrofit our city buildings. So I don't know if we might not ask for a report back on the concept of bonding all of our remaining city retrofits that we need in all of our city buildings, and how much that we expect that to save in energy efficiency, and how quickly we would be able to amortize that. But if we got to the point where every building had waterless urinals and 10 other things that save us water and energy, I can't believe that wouldn't be cost effective in the short and long run. And also on enforcement, I think we should make enforcement more self-funding. We have a project we've been working on for years, administrative code enforcement. When that finally goes in and eventually is spread to more departments, I think that could actually help enforcement pay for itself and actually allow us to provide the kind of enforcement we need to truly have a good quality of life in terms of those issues. So just a few thoughts, and thank you again for all your good work and analysis.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Just a couple of follow-ups. Mr. Bonin already kind of explored the Pension Review Commission, but as far as the mechanics. But Mr. Novi, what are you envisioning to be the outcome of that's different than what can be achieved through the citizen pension trustee boards that we already have? We have pension commissions for each of the commissions. They're appointed citizen volunteers. They have staff to be able to do the kind of scientific review and analysis that you and Jack mentioned the 2020 Commission didn't have. What would be the difference with a new kind of infrastructure that we don't already have?
I think when you're talking about the actual pension boards, those pension boards, the personnel on them have a fiduciary responsibility of purely looking at the risk and return for the stakeholders that they're providing. So they really can't dip into these conversations that are looking at changing from a defined contribution to a defined benefit program.
So it's more to recommend fundamental policy changes rather than cost reductions.
Correct.
Then.
Though it's important, I think, that you do have board input on some of these issues related to risk return, switching things around, going to more of a ETF index funding to place investments. That's purely a board type decision, but I think that your Pension Review Commission would look at all of these particular aspects and try to come up with a comprehensive pension reform plan.
Okay.
I would add a comment to that is, with this board, where's their analysis in the past? We haven't seen anything. It's just not there. So they haven't done it. Somebody else needs to do it.
But the question is, done what? I mean, on a daily basis, they review costs. They have independent actuaries that review all the assumptions. So I think what Mr. Novi has clarified is that you're not talking really about the job of reducing costs and doing all of the scientific work, I think was the term Jack used, of actually analyzing numbers. You're talking about making larger policy recommendations of changing the architecture, not changing how you decorate within the architecture, but changing the fundamental architecture of the entire structure. Okay, so I understand that. I just wanted to make a comment because somebody, I think, Mr. Novi, I think you were mentioning the return on investment in the market and how, people got excited about a larger return or something. I always take this opportunity to remind people that short-term fluctuations in the market are irrelevant to pension obligations. Irrelevant. What happens this year, what happens next year, could not be less relevant to to our pension obligation, because we have to look on a generational horizon, 20, 30 years or more. Whether it goes up, whether it goes down, that in a quarter is not the issue. The issue is whether on a sustained basis, and I know you know this, I'm not disagreeing with you, I think I just want to raise that point because you mentioned the short-term changes. The assumed rate of return of 7.75% that the 2020 Commission found to be so inappropriate is actually below the national average of public pension funds. And if you take those public pension funds, over 100 of them, more of them have higher assumed rates of returns than ours, than have lower assumed rates of returns than ours. Some of them are north of 8%. And in fact, throughout every period of time you'll look at, the assumed rate of return has been exceeded by public pension funds. If you take it across the board, their actual returns exceed the assumed rate of return. So it's just nonsense to say that these are somehow made-up numbers. They're not. They're based on national consensus, and routinely our funds, as well as the other public pension funds throughout the country, exceed those expectations. Now, that's only part of the equation, I understand. But I just always want to clarify that, because people say we should adopt a Buffett rule or something. Well, that would bankrupt this city to do that. To suggest that we should, double our contribution to our pension funds or something would cost more than the fire department to do that. And it makes no sense, because it's totally unnecessary given the fact that there's actual returns in the market that exceed our assumed rate of return over a 20 and 30-year horizon. So that's just silliness. It doesn't even make any sense. And then I want to mention the $49 million that you mentioned about police, that Mr. Handel mentioned about police payouts. This is, and I think I said it earlier about some other kinds of payouts with workers' compensation when the labor is up here. This is the one big area of expenditure that I think we can still make dramatic progress in reducing. And I am grateful that our current city attorney is taking a new focus on risk management and on reducing potential liability. He's really taking a look at how you avoid those costs from before it leads to litigation, avoiding the litigation altogether. And that, I think, is going to be an important step forward. I do want to just say, though, that the fact that there have been $49 million in payouts, whatever those are, relating to employment matters, should not be seen as an indication that all of those cases were about discrimination against women or minorities, number one. And number two, it should not indicate that, in fact, that occurred. So I agree with you that no degree of discrimination in our department is ever tolerable, but I have to give the department great credit for the great progress that they've made, actually, in trying to reduce that. It used to be a very different department. It is an incredibly inclusive department now, where management is rejecting any kind of discrimination, but it still lingers and exists. And that's a management responsibility. They're just going to have to continue to make that steady progress. But a lot of that liability, and we see it all the time in this committee, it's not just from the person who gets discriminated against. It's also the person who is then accused as being the manager who's doing the discriminating, the sergeant or the lieutenant or whatever. Disciplinary action gets taken there, and then we get sued because of that disciplinary action. So we get sued from both ends of this. And so I don't want to leave the false impression that somehow all of this liability is just due to, rife discrimination within the department. We get the lawsuits from every direction in these matters, and we need to do a better job of just reducing those costs altogether by hopefully, getting to the point where we resolve some of these inter-employee disputes before it gets to the litigation stage, before it gets to the point where it's, you go beyond the point of no return. Anyway, those are a few closing comments. I, again, just want to, thank you all very much. This has been a tremendous amount of work. There are many, many recommendations. I think that many of the older recommendations, although they might not have been presented in terms of a point-by-point response to previous reports, there have been many reports back on a lot of these subjects. And I think that's another thing the 2020 Commission got wrong. We actually, in fact, have listened to many of these recommendations. We have asked the CAO to give reports back on many of them, just not as a response to a particular report. So I think we've pretty much covered every aspect of this, and we'll have our list of reports back for consideration by tomorrow. If there's anything that's missing from what we've already asked for, we'll review that tomorrow and make sure that we capture that in tomorrow's approval as well. So thank you all very, very much for your continuing work, for your continuing commitment to our city.
And we thank you.
One more point in. 85% of our workers' compensation payouts come from the police department, and most of those are related to the brown belts. They're also related to a state law, which I hope you can get a report back on that circumstance. I'm not going to make any conclusions here, but it is something that you've asked us to try to find ways the city can save money and make money and be more efficient. I think that's one I'd like to add to your list, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. All right, members, with that, we're going to take a brief